Hi everyone, my name is Keith Brooks and this is Brooks Channel, and for today's video, I'm gonna continue reading the first draft of my Outcasts novel. Last time we covered chapter 3, which introduced us to the fourth of the main protagonists, Woody, and how he met the first three protagonists, Joey, Mitch, and Jay. Now the fourth chapter that we'll be covering today is the start of the first official arc in the series, and takes place around 7 years after the prologue. In this one, Joey will be 15 years old, Mitch and Jay will be 16, and Woody 14. And it covers how the boys' journey and adventures officially begin. And like I always say, this is only the first draft of the book, so some of it may not come out right, and I might have to change some stuff later. And with that out of the way, let's start reading. Alright. 7 years passed since the four boys became friends. In that time, they would spend nearly every day they could together. They played together, helped each other train, and fought against the meaner kids in town. But then one day, a series of events took place between the boys that would alter their lives forever. It was after school one afternoon, when Joey was walking home. With Mitch being sent home early, Woody going to his dance club meeting, and Jay being homeschooled, he was all alone that day. Joey was always nervous about walking on his own, so he was trying to just hurry back. Even with that, he heard a voice call out behind him. "Hey, dumbass!" the voice yelled, making Joey turn around to see who it was. His face turned into one of fear as he saw one of his longtime bullies standing just a few feet away. He looked at Joey with a devilish smirk while cracking his knuckles. "What's wrong?" the bully asked in a taunting voice. "Don't have any of your friends with you?" He proceeded to walk over to Joey, while his grin got a little wider. Joey instinctively turned to run away, only to bump into someone. He looked up to see it was another of the bully kids. He looked down at Joey with a creepy smile as he laughed menacingly. Joey tried to turn to the alleyway beside him to see one more bully walking up to him. He had been surrounded. "Where you going, huh?" the third bully asked. "We just want to talk." As he said this, the second bully grabbed Joey from behind by both arms, causing him to yelp in surprise as he was turned to face the first bully. "Why you looking so scared?" he asked Joey, moving just a few inches up to his face. "Is it 'cause the rest of the freaks aren't here to help you?" He then raised up his fist, ready to punch. Joey struggled to break free from the big bully's grip. Let go," he said with an uneasy tone. He almost broke free, only for the second bully to tighten his grip on both Joey's arms, causing him to groan out in pain. He was helpless to avoid what came next. The lead bully began punching Joey in the face, hitting him over and over again, as the other two just laughed at the sight. After about a dozen or so hits, he stopped to look at Joey's face, red from the abuse with tears forming in his eyes. "Heh," the head bully chuckled, admiring his handiwork. "Drop him." The big bully let go of Joey's arms, making him stumble a bit as he groaned from the pain. The head bully then grabbed Joey by his shirt and raised his fist up again. "No," Joey said, trying to push him off, only to get punched in the face again before he could put any force into it. He then fell onto his back with a shout of pain. The head bully just laughed at Joey before reaching down to lift him back up. "What was that?" he asked with a taunting voice. "Why, you think you're tough now? Come on, try something," he shouted angrily before putting both his hands around Joey's throat. Joey started to gag from the tight grip on his neck. As fear and desperation took over, he tried to punch the head bully's gut. His hits, however, were too weak to hurt, and the other two only laughed at his pitiful display. Then, without realizing it, Joey had summoned one of his boxing glove hands and hit his attacker right in the middle of his stomach. The force sent him flying to the other side of the street and slammed back first into a wall. He fell face down, completely unconscious from the impact. Everyone just looked at the aftermath, completely speechless. Joey stood there, realizing what he had just done. The other two bullies looked on in shock, for a moment before running away screaming. As they fled, Joey heard another voice call to him. Joey? The voice stuttered, just loud enough to hear. Joey turned around as his hand was formed on his arm. He looked over to see his mom standing there, looking at him in horrified shock. Joey just looked at her with wide eyes, only able to say, "Mom?" Meanwhile, at the Mason household, Mitch was in the living room getting yelled at by his father. It was a situation he dealt with countless times. He would stand there while his father berated him, and his mother stood there to the side without a sound. "Unbelievable," Mr. Mason said angrily to Mitch. "Making a hole to spy on the girls' changing room? What were you thinking?" He looked his son in the eye, already knowing how his answer would go. "All right, it was stupid. It was a stupid idea," Mitch said in response. His tone of voice sounded exhausted from hearing his father lecturing him. As usual, he said whatever he had to say just to get it done, faster. "I already said I'd fix it." "That's not the point," Mr. Mason yelled at Mitch. "One of those girls' father is a business associate of mine. Now I have to find a way to convince him not to pull out of an important deal because my son peeped on his daughter. Do you realize how embarrassing that conversation will be?" Of course that's all he cares about, Mitch thought to himself. For his father, everything revolved around his work. Even his own family was just part of creating a perfect image to help his business grow. Just pawns in his game for power. "Michael, don't you think you've yelled at him enough?" Mrs. Mason asked her husband. "I'm sure he's learned his—" "Stay out of this!" Mr. Mason cut her off while holding his hand out at her. Mary Mason's life was not an ideal one. Having been born into a poor family, she had started working at a young age to help her parents' financial struggles. Then one day, by chance, she caught the attention of Michael Mason, the then heir to the Mason Company. Seeing this as a chance for a better life, she spent years dating him and had their son next year. Though this new life was not how she envisioned it. Over time, Mary realized she was just a trophy wife, meant to look pretty and raise her husband's child for him. Mary looked over at Mitch while he and his father argued. They were both quite similar. The same red hair, green eyes, and almost the exact same facial features. They shared the same stubbornness also. Both were dead set on what they wanted out of life, to the point neither could sway the other to their side. The one difference being her husband being more controlling. He always had to have his way, no matter if it was right or wrong. "Why do you always act like this?" Mr. Mason asked. Mitch, even angrier than before. "Picking fights, shoplifting, drinking, spying on girls, and don't get me started on the parents that have chased you out of their daughters' rooms. At this rate, you'll ruin the whole future I planned out for you." Mitch looked at his father with an annoyed expression. "I've told you already, I'm not taking over your stupid company," he yelled irritatedly. "Once I'm done with school, I'm gonna do what I want." "Still living with your head in the clouds," Mr. Mason said, sounding more irritated than before. "Still dreaming about being some great hero, like in those worthless comics and cartoons you love so much. You honestly think an ordinary person could survive out there, surrounded by superhumans, magic users, and every other type of freak out there? Just like those good-for-nothing friends of yours." Mitch froze up for a moment at that last sentence. Then his hands both balled up into fists of rage. He could take his dad talking down to him, but not to Joey, Jay, or Woody, the only ones in town that really understood and accepted him. They were the ones he'd stick up for no matter what. He looked up at his dad with a fierce glare before speaking again. "They've been more like family to me in the last 7 years than you've been my whole life," Mitch yelled at the top of his lungs. "So don't ever talk shit about them again." "Did you forget who you're talking to, boy?" his father asked, looking like he was about to hit his own son. "Oh, I know who I'm talking to," Mitch said back to him instantly. "I'm talking to a selfish asshole that only cares about his stupid business, who only has a family to make himself look good, and doesn't give a damn what they want. You're just a piece of shit that we'd be better off without you. Both. Hang on. Mitch's father just looked at him in disbelief. Despite arguing and back-talking them most of the time, Mitch never went off like that before. After a moment, Mr. Mason looked at his son with a blank stare before saying the words, "Get out." Mitch's eyes widened in shock at hearing those words. Even with all the things his father had said and called him, this was something he never expected to hear from him. He looked over at his mom for a moment to see her looking just as shocked at him. "What?" he asked his father. "You heard me," Mr. Mason told his son. "If you're that ungrateful of the life I've allowed you to have, then pack your things and leave." "Michael!" Mrs. Mason shouted to her husband, only for him to completely ignore her. Mitch just stared at his father for a moment before looking at him angrily again. "Fine!" he screamed before storming off to his room to pack his things. Mr. Mason watched him leave before walking off to his home office with a long sigh. All Mrs. Mason could do was drop to her knees as tears formed in her eyes, wondering again how it all went wrong. While the conflict with the Mason family was finishing, a whole other was beginning at the Knight's home. Joey was sitting on the foot of his bed, facing both his parents. Having just showed them his boxing glove hands, they both looked at their son in shock and disbelief. After a moment, they regained enough composure to speak again. I can't believe this," Mr. Knight said, still not sure what he just saw. "How did this even happen?" "It had to be that magic user he's been hanging out with," Mrs. Knight replied. "This is exactly why I kept telling him to stay away from them." "What did they do to you?" she asked Joey in a serious tone. "Woody didn't do anything," Joey shouted nervously. "I've always been able to do this, ever since I was 8. Both of his parents looked at him with wide eyes, completely shocked at what their son just has admitted to them. "What?" Mrs. Knight stuttered out. "You've been hiding this from us for 7 years?" Mr. Knight asked. "Why would you hide this from us?" "Because I knew you'd react like this," Joey answered. "I knew you'd freak out like this and think something was even more wrong with me." "Who else knows about this?" Mr. Knight asked in a demanding tone. "All 3 of my friends, Mr. Gentili and Mr. Johnson," Joey admitted. "They're the only people in town I ever trusted enough to tell." "Unbelievable," Mrs. Knight said to herself. "And now those 3 other boys know too. They'll tell their parents, and then the whole town will know within a week." Joey looked at his parents, wondering why they cared more about his powers than why he had to use them. "Those guys were beating me up," Joey shouted to his mom. "I had to use my gloves to protect—" "That's already over," she snapped back at him, before putting her hand to her forehead with a sigh. "What do we do about this?" Mr. Knight put a hand on his wife's shoulder and looked her in the eye. "Hun, I think we should reconsider calling—" "Not here," she said, cutting him off. "We'll talk more about this later," she said to Joey before leaving the room with her husband. Joey was forced to stay in his room for the night, wondering what his parents were talking about. As the night went on, Joey became more curious about what his parents were talking about before they left. His curiosity kept him from falling asleep. Instead, he waited until midnight, when his parents were fast asleep, and made his move. He quietly snuck out of his room and across the hall to his parents. Joey slowly cracked the door open and peeked inside and saw both his mom and dad asleep in their bed. He then opened the door just enough to go inside. After staying still for a moment, he slowly and quietly tiptoed further in to look for something that could give him an answer. Soon, he saw a piece of paper by his dad's nightstand that stood out and snuck over to it. He then silently read it, only to be stunned by what it said. The paper was actually a pamphlet for a place Joey had never heard of before. It said, "Dr. Morales' Facility for Abnormal Children. We'll fix your problematic child in no time at all." He just stood there for a whole minute, processing what this meant. Joey put the pamphlet back as he found it and quietly went back to his room. After closing the door, he sat on the floor and started to cry. Mom and Dad are gonna send me away. What do I do? Joey thought, whacking his brain to find a solution. After spending what felt like forever studying and thinking, to no avail, Joey decided he needed to find help. He went over to his book bag and emptied all his school supplies, replacing them with spare clothes, along with some snacks and drinks he had lying around, in case he needed anything while out. He then snuck downstairs and out the door. After looking back at his family's home for a moment, he quickly ran down the street to find anyone to help him. Okay, who can I go to that could help me stay? Joey thought to himself desperately. None of my teachers would care enough to help. Neither would our neighbors. Maybe. It was then Joey bumped into someone, making him stop with an "Ooh." Sorry, Joey said while rubbing where he hit his head on the other person. Joey? The person asked, sounding surprised to see him. Joey then opened his eyes to see Mitch standing there. Mitch? He asked back. What are you doing out this late? Mitch asked Joey curiously. Joey stood there for a moment, unsure of how to start explaining the situation. A lot of bad stuff happened and I don't know what to do, he said. Do you think I could stay with you for a while I think of what to do? Mitch just looked away awkwardly for a moment, remembering his own problems from earlier. That might be a problem, he said. And that's the 4th chapter. Yeah, some of my speaking may have been a little awkward, along with how I wrote some things. Sorry about that. Like usual, I'm hoping doing this will help me get a little better at reading aloud. But, yeah. That's the 4th chapter, covering Joey and Mitch, how their conflicts start. Like, Joey, his parents figuring out about his powers and planning to send him away on someplace thinking it would help him. And Mitch getting into it with his dad and getting kicked out because both sides had enough of the other. Yeah. The next chapter, chapter 5, will cover Jay and Woody's side of things. And I'll probably do that a week or two from now. Let's see, I'm still working on the 8th chapter. I'm still in the first half of that at the time of this video. And I'll probably wait till like the 9th or last chapter are done before I read the second half of the book. We got 2 chapters left for the first half, 5 and 6. And I hope you look forward to hearing them. And I'll try not to be as awkward next time. And yeah, not much else to say, so I'm just gonna end the video here. And as always, please let me know your thoughts about this war in the comments. And with that, I will see you all in the next video. Bye.